opportunity to talk to Stephen a little bit more about the film, hopefully, particularly for those who did the Horror Nation module, who have got a vested interest in British horror with some questions. I think the last production students got here, again, it's kind of opportunity to explore issues around kind of funding and development. And I'd probably like to start, if I may, Stephen, by asking, a lot's been made in the reviews, or was made in the reviews at the time, about similarities to this and the Fred and Rosemary West case. Yeah. My question to you is how much that case had preyed on your mind and was consciously kind of worked into the fabric of this, or is it actually that under the mantle of the type of film that it was inevitable that those comparisons are going to be drawn?
Yeah, obviously it came to mind, but it's so weird. When the film came out, there was a lot made of the fact that, I think it all stemmed from a press release. Actually, I think a press release might have gone out saying, based or influenced by, inspired by Fred and Rose West. So everybody kind of picked up on that, and obviously there are kind of elements in there that are reminiscent of Fred and Rose West, and there are elements that, for example, the all-encompassing kind of perversity of the household, I knew was something that, having read reports about Fred and Rose West, I knew that there were these kind of weird kind of like peccadillos that they had, between the two of them. But it was never based on Fred and Rose West, because if I was going to do the Fred and Rose West film, I wouldn't, they're doing it now, aren't they? Are they making it now? They're shooting the Fred and Rose West story. I would have pitched to do that, because that, it's horrific enough, and it's wrong enough, and it's, so it was a bit annoying to have people say, it's a Fred and Rose West story, because I would have just done that, I would have just pitched that, but this was its own thing. I think in the original outline that I wrote, I mentioned something like a Fred and Rose West style House of Horrors, just because it was shorthand, that people would get that it was, it wasn't just the dad doing it, it was the mum as well, that it was this sort of twisted family. So there is a bit of Fred and Rose West in there, but not a deliberate. It's not a deliberate kind of take on Fred and Rose West, I don't say.
It must seem much ahead of its time now, in that since the film was released, yes, we had kind of prior to that the Fred and Rosemary West case. Actually, since the release, we seem to have had more and more.
Filming it, the whole story about the Austrian girl came out.
That's what I was thinking about particularly.
I think just as we were filming it, just after we filmed it. So people said, I think there's a mix between some of the finances going, oh my god, this is going to be really dodgy, and some finances going, brilliant, we'll get some great press out of this. Like it's a trend for perverting families and torturing and kidnapping children. But I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think you get these things in terms of the press that, that sort of memes that kind of go around. I mean, a few years ago it was dangerous dogs, and dangerous dogs were everywhere and savaging our children all over the place. And now I'm sure there's no fewer dogs or savage children, but we don't hear about them anymore. It's just a thing that the media picks up on. So
sure.
I'm sure there are stories like that happening all over the place all the time. I think it just takes. What it takes is for the media to take an interest in it, and the media likes to kind of vary things in terms of what their particular kind of bugbear is that month or that year.
Thank you.
I'm a writer, and I was just wondering what the writing process was like for Mum and Dad.
Okay. Like I said, I initially got asked to put in for this fund, and the deadline for it was pretty much 4 weeks from when I got told about it. Like 4 weeks to produce the outline. So the outline that I wrote was 17 pages, and that pretty much went scene by scene through the film. It had more or less everything in it that's in the final film. There were a few things that came later, but pretty much the whole kind of setup and the relationships and the characters were in it. Once we submitted that, we got some feedback from the financiers from Film London, Andy and Media. Didn't really do any tweaks at that point, I don't think, but then had about another month to take it to the first draft. So I had like 4 or 5 weeks, wrote the first draft, and the first draft was about 72, 73 pages long. And that was just head down kind of writing it. But because I had this outline, I knew that they'd approved the outline. I kind of went off that, and it was probably the quickest script that I've written. It kind of I don't know why it happened. I think I was just trying to keep it quite simple. I knew that it was going to pretty much be in one location, that it was only be these kind of 5 characters. I knew that because, in a way, the advantage was because I knew going into it what the budget would be. I knew what I could afford in terms of effects, in terms of setup. So again, it was like, you know, like with the filming, there were things that were kind of there were limitations to it. I think it's always quite good to have those limitations on board in some ways. So I wrote this 74 page draft, and that was the one we got commissioned on. But then I knew that I'd have to, they said, oh, well, you have to obviously make it up to kind of full feature length. It needs a bit more in it. So I had to add about 20 pages to it, which was another kind of trick, because by that point it had been okay by the financiers, so I couldn't add any more characters, any more locations, or any more effects. So the stuff that kind of came in then, I think, I think that's where the foot massage scene came from, actually, which was because I wanted something that was horrible and repulsive that was cheap, and somebody massaging somebody's kind of black and stinking toe, I knew it would be repulsive, but it would be really cheap to do. So, and all the way along, I was trying to think of things that would be repulsive and cheap. so the bit with the suitcase, for example, I knew would be effective, but it's, you know, it's the most ridiculously cheap thing to do. You buy a big cheap suitcase, you see somebody get into it. You know, obviously you take the actress out, you fill it full of stuff, you do a little voice from inside the suitcase, and then you just hit it with a hammer. And, you know, I know that audiences know that that's what you do, but it doesn't. But it still kind of seems to be effective because it has that kind of. You have the idea that she's inside the case, and you see her go in, and you see her come out. So yeah, in a way, kind of working with that, with the budget limitations in mind, was a good thing. You know, and I think it can be hard sometimes when you're a writer and you're just faced with that blank bit of paper, and just thinking, what should I do? Sometimes to give yourself those kind of artificial limitations and say, well, I'm going to say, you know, in one location 5 characters, and it's going to be about this, is quite a good thing to do. Is kind of start narrowing it down for yourself. So yeah, that was pretty much a process. It was kind of 2.5 drafts, and that's what we filmed.
Hi, that was the first horror film I've seen in a long time, and it was really good, so well done. And just wondering about the gore and violence element. Were you encouraged by anyone to amplify it or to turn it down?
I was encouraged to tone it down. There's not that much gore in it. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, because the people who financed the film, one of the executive producers, Lizzie Frankie from EM Media, is a big horror fan, so I knew that she'd be into it. But Film London, the panel who selected the film, none of them were kind of horror fans, and there was concern about how much blood would be on screen. But like I say, everything was in the outline from the beginning, from the human Christmas tree guy to the horrible bit of flesh on the desk. That was all in there. Do you know what I mean? So they kind of knew what they were getting.
Can I just ask you a quick question as well? Obviously, you're really involved in the whole movie when you're working on it. How do you stop it from making you go a bit weird? How do you sort of get involved in the rest of life? Do you know what I mean? How do you do the normal family things as well?
I remember showing one of my own horror films to a friend of mine, and she came out of it, and she looked at me and went, oh, I guess better out than in. And that's kind of, I think that's it, because you know, when you're writing it, when you're making it, when you're thinking all that, that's when all this kind of like wrong stuff's coming out. So yeah, it's kind of free therapy. I don't kind of keep it inside. I think, you know, people who make romantic comedies are probably more twisted stuff than I am, because they're keeping all their darkness and bitterness inside, and the world had all their sweetness and light. I mean, the atmosphere on set was really good. It didn't ever feel kind of like oppressive or grim. We had a laugh, because when you're making it, it's, you know, the actors like it because it's good fun. They get to play monsters, and they get to like do fun stuff with the effects. And, yeah, obviously there were a few moments like Olga had to be kind of strung up like that for the torture scene for like hours, and that, you know, if you try doing that for more than like 5 minutes at a go, just hold, you know, obviously she wasn't completely constrained, but she had to be constrained to a certain extent. That was really hard going for her. And emotionally, for Dido, who played Mum, some of the scenes, you know, because she has to be quite horrible and quite creepy, I think she found that quite difficult, but it was a good time on set. I mean, you know, my daughter came to visit us on set. I mean, she had to be blinkered like that when I was bits of it, because she was only like 5. But, you know, it was fine.
I really like the sound design of the film. Can you talk a bit about that and why you kind of disposed of the score apart from like the Christmas songs?
I didn't want to have a score as such, because I didn't want to have that traditional horror film thing of telling the audience when to jump or telling them what was scary was coming up. I think the whole film is supposed to kind of feel like it's from Lane's point of view, so it's supposed to be a bit disorienting. Everything's supposed to feel a bit strange, and you're supposed to, it kind of switches between these scenes of kind of horror and the domestic, and I wanted to be able to kind of do that. And for those two things, it starts off with bits where the domestic leads into the horror, so the birdie comes in with the tea and biscuits during the torture scene, or the horror leading into the domestic, or perversely leading into the domestic, so you have the porn playing on the TV during breakfast while everything else is normal. And as the film goes on, the two things get deliberately more mixed up, so that by the time you get to Christmas, you've got the human Christmas tree up there, and nobody's acting like it's normal, so everything gets more mixed up in the end. So I didn't want to have that score that made it feel like a traditional horror film. I also knew that I wanted to use each of the rooms to be kind of reflective of, I guess, the personalities of the people who inhabited them. So Mum's room, or the room Lane is in, which Mum uses in her sort of torture room, is quite spare. I mean, in terms of set design, it's quite spare. There's only a bed in there, because I think Mum is quite clean and clinical. I always have this description of, Mum is like a Lindy and Dad's like a hammer. Mum's very kind of clean and clinical, and Dad's just like a bludgeon. And then as far as the music goes, when we've got the Christmas scene, I just wanted it to have that kind of, I wanted to have more of a kind of party feel, and originally we had a couple of tracks on there that we could never afford to get it, so then I went to the composer that we hired and said, I want songs that kind of have that similar sort of tempo and tone, but can you make them sound like somebody would have bought them on a CD from a garage for about £3, because I wanted to have that sort of kind of that cheapness and that corniness and that kind of, the whole idea of the Christmas stuff is to make it feel kind of really kind of sort of sickly and rich and kind of too much sherry and that kind of, to have that kind of mad feel that you have when you're kind of, I guess, in your 20s and going home to your family home for Christmas, and you just feel like, oh my God, can I just get out of here? They're driving me mental. So that was the whole kind of feel of it.
You said you weren't inspired by the West, but who were you inspired by, or did it all just come from your head?
Different things come from different places, I guess. I mean, a lot of it, there were no sort of scenes that directly came from other places. I mean, so I guess means a lot of it came out of my head. I guess the thing was, things like the Christmas scene, I knew that I wanted to have, we had the sort of breakfast scenes, but I knew that I wanted to have something that was a bit more of a kind of family scene. I know that in Texas Chainsaw Massacre you have the meal at the end, everybody sits down, and that's the kind of creepy bit. I kind of wanted something like that, but I didn't want to do a sit-down meal, so that was kind of inspiration for doing something kind of Christmassy. And I guess a lot of it just stemmed from this, like I say, following this kind of idea of this kind of twisting the idea of the family and twisting that idea of my house, my rules, and how you can play off the kind of darkness of that, the potential darkness of that kind of relationship. If you have parents who believe that children are their possessions to do what they will, and how far do you take that?
Hi. This isn't necessarily a question directly related to the film, but for you as a filmmaker. Because Tom recently mentioned that the Derby's run the master's degree in horror, which is fantastic, but a lot of people would disagree, and there's a lot of criticism in the press about, film and media related degrees, and I was just wondering what your opinion is on them as a filmmaker, because you mentioned earlier that you originally studied literature at university. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird for me because I didn't come through that kind of background. I didn't come through as a media course or anything. In fact, when I was studying, it was before there was a big proliferation of media courses. And I think the difficult thing is, if you're doing a media course these days, is that they're probably a lot more kind of oversubscribed than they should be, because looking at the size of the industry, the film and TV industry in this country, it's very hard. It makes it very competitive for people leading courses like that to kind of get work, because there's so many other people already out there. For me, it was good to as well come to filmmaking from a background that was, that was kind of something else. That, that I was a bit older and I'd done this course. It was more literature based, so I had a lot more kind of influences rather than just films. It meant that I was a late starter in a way, because I hadn't been making kind of video home movies since I was 6, like some people, or Super 8, like Spielberg. It meant I didn't pick up cameras until I was like in my mid-20s. But I think that's meant for me and other people that I know who didn't have a similar kind of trajectory, that we have different sensibility coming into it, that all our references aren't necessarily film, that there are other things we can bring to it. But I think it's, I was talking earlier about it in the interview, I think that you need to look at it as to what you can get out of it. I think that it's kind of hard, I guess, when you're younger, but I think you've got to have a sense of where you want to end up and choose a course that will allow you to get there. And for me, if you want to end up making films, you've got to be taking practical steps to do that. And that means learning about the equipment, but it also means learning about the basics of filmmaking. And the only way that you can learn about the basics of filmmaking really is to do it. It's very practical. You have to make films. Now, if you're on a course, you're within a structure where you've got, the good thing about it is that you've got ready-made kind of crewmates or collaborators or people that will help you out. It's easier than if you're just if you're not doing a course and you're on your own and you don't know anybody who can help out. That's a good thing about it. You learn those kind of communication skills, which are absolutely key to filmmaking. Filmmaking is all communication. From the moment you start telling somebody your idea for a film to the time when you're doing the press about it, it's all communication. So that's going and doing a course with a bunch of other like-minded people. There's a good opportunity to experience that. It can be really frustrating. I know from being a student, I know from teaching students that if you've got 5 people who want to be directors and you put them in a group and say, all right, now make a film together, it's hellish, because you're trying to get your own voice in there and you end up with this kind of mishmash of everybody coming in there. But actually going through that process of trying to get your voice heard and trying to work with other people is really good experience for making it. But I think you do have to look at the course that you're applying for, the course that you're doing, and thinking, is this giving me what I need? It doesn't have to give you everything, because there's still opportunity after the course to kind of do your own thing, or even outside the course to do your own thing. But I think if you want to be practically making films, then you've got to look at how am I getting hands-on experience with equipment? How am I filming? How am I shooting? If I'm not, is there a way that I can use this equipment that's available to do that outside of the course? Because if you want to make films, you have to be physically making them. It's no good just kind of being in an environment where you're just talking about it, But with the MA, it's a much more it's a course that's much more about looking at horror and looking at kind of the genre and exploring that. I think that's another thing that's very kind of good, is to kind of expand your kind of obviously consciousness, but expand your kind of experience of what horror is. Not just to be confined into this very narrow band of what's on the logic there.
Yeah, so there's still a value to them. You'd agree, definitely.
But like I say, you have got to not look at the course giving you everything. You've got to look at what do I need, and you've got to, I guess, at quite a young age, think, where do I want to be, and is this course a step towards that, or is it taking me in a different direction? If you want to be, a director, is it allowing me to kind of experience the things that I need to experience to be a director, or a writer, or a camera operator, or an editor? Is it allowing me to do that? And if it's not, how can I get those experiences? And is there another course that does that? So I think you have to be quite kind of, not ruthless, but you have to kind of look at what it's doing for you, and if you're dissatisfied, then change it. Don't worry. I mean, I shouldn't be saying this in a university, but in terms of qualifications, nobody has ever asked me what my qualification is in filmmaking. They've asked me what I've worked on before, or what I've done, or who I've worked with. Nobody's ever asked me about qualification. So the qualification in itself isn't the thing. It's what you learn through doing the course that is the thing that you need to look at. Because the qualification on its own won't get you very far, because there are a lot of people who have that qualification. It's what you do why you're on the course and what you make and what you experience that will be the thing that will get you into the film industry.
While we're broadening the horizons here, I'd be very interested, Stephen, to get your take on the future of the horror genre. Recently, and for a long time, I've been concerned about the so-called torture porn film, and I think this manages to tread the right side of that, and it's a difficult balancing act for horror to achieve. And recently, I had what I still think is probably the misfortune to view a Serbian film. And my students are aware of this, and I kind of thought we've almost come to the end now. What do we do after a Serbian film was released, and albeit with some monumental cuts made? It's almost like we've exhausted that particular line of inquiry. My question then is, where do you see the future? And as someone involved, obviously, in the Mayhem Horror Film Festival, you're kind of right up there, probably asking the same questions. Where is the future of horror now for you?
I don't know. I think we have kind of reached the end of that cycle, really. I think the Serbian film probably is kind of full stop to that, because I don't. And weirdly, I think one of the things that dictates that is the fact that a Serbian film can't be released uncut. So commercially, it's a problem. You know, if people buy films. If people are making films that then can't be released commercially in uncut versions, it's a problem for the distribution companies. They don't want that. You know, if Revolver can't release that film uncut, people will say, well, I'm not buying a cut version, I'll go and download the uncut version for free. Revolver don't make any money out of it, so what's the point? On a very kind of hard-headed kind of commercial level, then there's no impetus for people to make films like that beyond, you know, the impetus of kind of wanting to explore or, you know, expand the kind of you know, the boundaries of what can appear on screen as violence. I mean, so I think we have kind of reached the end of that. But as for what kind of replaces it, I don't know. There seems to be more of kind of interesting kind of supernatural and ghost stories now, and that seems to be kind of coming back again. But I think it's. And also, in terms of like the cycle of torture porn, I think, you know, in terms of mainstream cinema, we're kind of getting to the end of that. And we're getting also to a point where you get stuff like Piranha 3D, which is just, you know, ridiculous. It's just, you know, it's just tits and blood. I mean, that's all it is. And it knows what it's that, and that's all it wants to be. And, you know, we're having, what's it, Piranha 3 Double D now. So it's like, it knows exactly what it's doing. That's what it's going to be. Tits and blood. That's what you want. There you go. There's not much further you can go down that route apart from showing, you know, a 90-minute film with just a pair of tits with some blood on it. You know, there's not much further you can go with that. So I think that, you know, there has to be kind of new things. And it's hard to know what come up. I mean, I think the whole kind of torture porn genre proliferated weirdly because there were so many more images of torture on screen because of, you know, things like Iraq and Abu Ghraib and things like that. You suddenly had a lot more, you know, compared to like the 90s, there was a lot more images of people being tortured. So suddenly that kind of seeped into people's consciousness and filmmakers' consciousness as something that you could use, you know, something that you could that would tap into a kind of national, international mindset. And that's not the case anymore. We're all kind of like inured to it now. We've all seen the torture stuff. They don't even show it on the news anymore. There's no reports. I'm sure it's still going on. People are being tortured, detained, and terrible things happen to them. But we don't. Again, it's another thing that the media have grown bored with. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see a whole kind of genre of films that are about, you know, that are more to do with class and more to do with money. Because, you know, obviously the whole world's been in recession, and, you know, I think everybody wants to see. Maybe it'd be cathartic to see a whole bunch of films where rich people get kind of, or bankers get eviscerated or tortured. You know, maybe you know, I think that could be the kind of next thing, or maybe, you know, maybe we'll have the opposite. Maybe we'll have kind of, you know, those films like Most Dangerous Game style films where, you know, rich people are kind of hunting down the poor as animals. You know, maybe that's the next thing. But I think something along, I think it always kind of stems from something. You've always got to look at what are, you know, as you know, what are the concerns of the society at the time, and it's kind of, sometimes that doesn't necessarily manifest itself until a few years afterwards. You really kind of figure out what that is. But I think for horror now is that you're getting more and more horror films that are kind of coming out of nowhere, really, because people know that they can make them. People have always known they can make them cheap, but now the access to equipment and the possibility of making a horror film for less than 100 grand or less than 10 grand or less than £1,000 is out there. You can do it. And not only can you do it, but you can upload it, get it online, and you can get an audience for it. So I think that's going to kind of change things. I mean, I'm hoping that we get, the horror gets more kind of underground again, in a way. You get more of a sense of it being transgressive rather than just being something that you go and see with your date on a Friday night at the UGC and go, oh yeah, Saw 7, it's all that. You want it to be something that has more of an effect than that, rather than just being one of another series of films that's just out there. Oh, shall we go and see Saw 7, or shall we go and see Hangover 2? Let's flip a coin. You want something where people are driven to see it because of the interest in the film itself, not just that it's another thing on the menu.
And what about for you personally, in terms of where you go next with your own filmmaking and writing, and what's on the cards there?
I've co-written a script for a film called Gozo, which has just been shot at the moment on an island called Gozo next to Malta. And that's more of a kind of psychological ghost story that I was commissioned to write. But that should be out, I don't know, end of the year, hopefully. And then there's another film that I'm working on, which I'm attached to as a director, that is due to go in the autumn, which is completely different, which is in Indonesia, and it's a much more kind of full-on kind of horror film about underground creatures. I can't really talk too much about at the moment because they've asked me not to, but it will be much more kind of, it's completely different. It's a million miles away from mum and dad in some respects, but yeah, still firmly in kind of horror camp. And then there's another couple of projects I'm working on. There's something I want to shoot really kind of low budget with a really kind of stripped down cast and crew. Again, I'm just writing at the moment, and I'm hoping to kind of film.
Stephen, thank you so much for today. Thank you.